Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining me for tonight's Facebook Live session when I will be talking about cow's milk versus plant-based milks. There is so much confusion out there and there's so much choice, so I thought I'd do a live to help you dispel any myths and also help you to work out, what are the best choices? What is the best choice and why? And from my perspective, it's about the nutritional value. So before I start, I just want to introduce myself. So my name is Simpkin. I'm a registered nutritionist and I'm here to share with you Nutrition the May Way. What is Nutrition the May Way? What is the May Way? So the May Way is a realistic, practical and achievable approach to health. So it's a no-nonsense approach to health and nutrition so that you really understand that what's going on with nutrition, and then you can make some great choices. So I know so many of you who approach me either as my client or within my Facebook group, which is called Nutrition the May Way. So if you haven't joined yet or you're thinking about it, just head over there. It is free and it's a great environment to be in. And one of the questions I posed there is, are there any problems that you'd like me to deal with? And milk was one that came up by a few of you. So I thought, here I am, I will address that one for you. As I say, there's a lot to consider, and I hope that I'm going to be able to help you make some better choices by really explaining to you the nutritional value at each of the different milks and what you should be looking for, because the manufacturers are very clever in the way they market their products so that I think you're making a really great choice, but actually sometimes they might not be as good as you may think they are. So if you're out there, I'd love you to keep telling me you're there by sending over some hearts or some thumbs up. It's great to know that you're there. So I'll get going. Now, the consumption of cow's milk has really reduced significantly in the last 20 years. And there's so many reasons for that. So there is a notion that dairy and therefore cow's milk can contribute to skin health problems, so perhaps acne. There's a movement towards becoming more vegan. So obviously cow's milk is from a cow, so is not permitted on a vegan diet. Lots more allergies. There are people who are allergic to the protein in milk. There are people who are intolerant or allergic to lactose. So all of those things are really going to mean that having cow's milk is going to cause you problems. Now, it may not be that it is the cow's milk that's causing you those problems. It could be, but it may not be. But wanted just to explore a little bit about why it is that cow's milk is actually considered a very good choice in the first place, because we're always told to consume dairy as part of a balanced, healthy diet. And for years and years, that was always the case. So traditionally, people have always consumed milk as part of a healthy diet. And it was standard. We were all brought up. I know certainly my generation were brought up on milk. We even had it at school where every break time we would be drinking milk. And that's always been cow's milk. There were no alternatives. And that's the way it was. And it was very much part of a balanced, healthy diet. So why is it? Why is it that milk was always considered such a good diet, good for your diet? Well, one of the main reasons is that it is a very, very good protein. It's a first-class protein. So a first-class protein means that we have all the amino acids that we need to obtain from the diet. And that's what I mean by a first-class protein, and it contains all the essential amino acids. And for those of you that have watched me before or certainly familiar with the way I work, you'll know that the word essential means that it has to come from the diet. So you know that when you're consuming milk, cow's milk, you are getting all the essential amino acids that you need for your body to be able to fulfill all its functions to do with protein. So that's one of the first reasons. Now, the second reason is that it is a good source of calcium, but not just any calcium. It's a source of bioavailable calcium, so that it means that the body recognizes that form of calcium. So it's already in a form that the body recognizes, so it can use it immediately and start using it without having to process it in another form. So it is a very high source of protein. It's also a good source of iodine. Now, here in the UK, it's very difficult to get enough iodine because iodine would normally come from our soil. But recent farming methods and the way that we're eating our vegetables, and certainly the amount of vegetables that we're consuming, means that we may not be getting enough iodine in our diet. And iodine is essential for thyroid health. So without iodine, you can't make thyroid hormones as efficiently. So here in the UK, cow's milk is actually a good source of iodine as well. So those are sort of the main reasons. And as well as iodine, it also has other minerals like phosphorus, potassium, and B vitamins. So you can see already that by consuming cow's milk, you're actually going to be getting what we've always known to be a complete food. It doesn't have everything, but it certainly has a good range of nutrients that make it a worthwhile thing to include in your diet. Now, having said all of that, it is still possible to get good nutrients from plant-based milks, but there are some things that those plant-based milks don't have. And I'm going to go through each one with you because actually they do differ. And I think this is something that people don't often realize. They think, well, actually any alternative is going to be good enough. But that isn't actually the case. And in fact, even myself, having researched a little bit for this session, I was actually quite interested to see how they really can differ. I obviously know that they do. But when we're looking at it as nutritionally speaking, so what nutrients am I getting from those plant-based milks, there is actually quite a difference. And so I want to run through them with you so that you also have a good idea. So when you're out choosing your milks, you can make your best decision according to your needs and according to your principles, because obviously one of the reasons that people have stopped having cow's milk is there's an ethical implication as well. So perhaps farming methods, or as I said, if you've turned vegan, then it means that it isn't something that you're going to be able to have. So the first one that I'd like to come to is soy milk. Now, nutritionally speaking, soy milk is probably the closest to cow's milk. So in terms of its macronutrients, so in other words, its carbohydrates, its fat and protein, most importantly, protein content, it's actually probably the most similar to cow's milk. Now, how do we make these milks? So, before I actually go further into detail of each of those milks, it's interesting to know how these milks are actually made. And they're essentially made very similar to how we make juices. So we grind everything down and extract the milk or the liquid part of whether it's a bean, a nut, or a seed, or even a grain. I'm going to be talking about rice milk as well as a grain. So once you've ground down that bean, and with soy milk, it's actually the soy bean that we're looking for, we grind that down and then you mix it with unfiltered water. That's the essentially how we make any milk that is not a cow's milk. And then you will find there are other additives, whether that's a thickener, a starch, or any other additives that will increase its shelf life, or things that will affect its texture and consistency. So that's why it's very, very important to look at the label as well to see exactly what's involved. So going back to soy milk, we're making it from the original soybean. And as long as we are making it from the original soybean, then we know it's going to contain something called isoflavones, which are plant compounds that essentially mimic the body's natural estrogen. So they are what we call a phytoestrogen. They mimic the body's natural estrogen. So that means that it can affect our natural hormone balance. Now, that is a whole another subject that I will discuss separately, but in terms of the milk value, I want you to understand that if it can affect the hormone balance, it doesn't always necessarily mean it's a positive way. It can adversely affect hormone balance. So if menopause is something that you are thinking about, I wouldn't automatically say that soybean is a good choice. There is also research and evidence to suggest that there is a link between soybean consumption and cancer, particularly breast cancer. So that's also another consideration. But I will say that there are conflicting studies. So the jury's out, but I would want you to be aware that there is an implication there. But the reason I'm saying that is that it is the closest to cow's milk in terms of nutritional values, in terms of the content, carbohydrate, protein and fat content. It is actually the closest. It has less calcium than milk, and also less iodine and less vitamins, B vitamins. But if you choose a brand that is fortified, so when you choose a fortified brand, the manufacturers have realized that there are nutrients lacking, and they're going to fortify and add in the nutrients that you should be getting. But I still would urge you to check on the labels to make sure that they are fortified and that you are getting the nutrients that you expect. So that is soy milk. So the next one is hemp milk. Now, hemp milk is made out of hemp seeds. Now, hemp seeds themselves actually do contain good fiber, and they are a good source of omega-3 fats. So those are the anti-inflammatory fats that we should actually be eating more of. But I want you to be careful here, because that's the hemp seed itself. But when that's then ground down into a milk and mixed with water, you don't actually get the same health benefits of the seed. So in other words, you don't get the same amount of fiber, because remember I was explaining to you it's almost like the juicing process, so you lose a lot of that fiber. And then you also lose a lot of the omega-3 value. So it isn't actually as good a source. However, it is a good protein source. So it is a high protein plant-based milk. So from that perspective, it is a good source. And actually, you do get a good source of the good fats, the omega-3 fats that I mentioned, but you are losing that fiber element when you are turning it into a juice. So I would say that's actually probably a good choice, because it's good protein and good oils, but again, the calcium is lacking, and perhaps you would need to look at a fortified version as well. Now, the next one that's very popular is almond milk. Now, almond milk, I really urge you to be careful with how much almonds there are in it, or percentage almonds. Most shop-bought varieties will only have 2% almonds. Now, that's not a lot, 2%, that's all. Because what happens is that the almonds are ground down into a milk and mixed in with the filtered water. And you also need to consider that an almond milk is actually very low in protein. So actually, I wouldn't say it's a very good choice. It is low in calories. It does need to be fortified with extra nutrients, that's B vitamins, vitamins D as well, and calcium. But it's low in protein because it's low in actual almonds. So almonds are actually a good source of protein if they're eaten whole, but as a milk, it isn't actually high enough in protein. Now, I want you to be aware, I know in my group there was a big discussion about a homemade version. And yes, a homemade version, you can certainly increase the protein content or the almond content you can increase the protein content by increasing the almond content, but still not enough. And it's very important to make sure that you're choosing one, if it's a shop-bought one, that is fortified. And obviously, when you make your own at home, you might be able to increase the actual almond content and therefore the protein content, but you're not going to be able to fortify it with calcium and vitamins. So that's one of the dangers of making it at home and assuming then that it is a good alternative. So unfortunately, it's not as good if you're considering it as a cow's milk alternative. And I do stress that, because if it's just for the taste and for the enjoyment and for the variation, it's absolutely fine. But if it's a cow's milk alternative and therefore you're looking for a good calcium source, then unfortunately homemade almond milk, even with more almonds, is not going to cut it. So the next one is coconut milk. Now, coconut milk is made of shredded coconut flesh, again mixed with unfiltered water. Now, this is probably one of the lowest protein and lowest calcium sources. So unfortunately, although it tastes amazing and it is a really nice one to include, it's a very creamy taste because it's got a high fat content. It isn't actually a very good choice because it's very low in protein and also very low in calcium. The fat content, however, is a medium chain fatty acid, which is this, it goes with any coconut product, which actually means it gets used first as a fat source for energy, so it doesn't get stored. So you've got the benefits of it being a good fat, which gives it that creaminess, but you don't have the same calcium and protein content. In fact, it's actually virtually no protein. So that's really important to think about, because actually from a satiation point of view, all these milks with very low protein are not going to fill you up, whereas cow's milk with very high protein is going to fill you up. So from a satiation point of view, then that's also a good one. Now, another one is rice milk. Now, rice milk, again, is made from the rice grain. So when you grind it down, you're going to lose a lot of the fiber if you've got a whole grain rice. So you're going to lose that fiber element. And although rice itself does contain protein, it would still be considered a very low protein milk when you're making it up into a milk. It has more carbohydrate element than some of the other milks that I've discussed. And that's because rice is a carbohydrate. So it's going to have more sugar in that milk as well. So that's something to consider. So, having gone through the different milks, there is also one other that's called oat milk. And oat milk is simply oat flakes, soaked usually, and again, ground down so that you mix it in with water. Now, oats do contain beta-glucans, which are soluble fiber. And soluble fiber is great for when we're thinking about managing cholesterol, because cholesterol will bind to that soluble fiber and get removed. So, and you do get those benefits in a milk as well, which is great. But again, it's not very good protein, and you're going to have to think about choosing one that has been fortified to include more calcium and vitamins and minerals, in particular vitamin D, which goes with calcium to increase the uptake. So essentially, you need to think about what your needs are. So if calcium is important, and where calcium is really crucial is when we're in a developmental stages. So for toddlers, teens, pregnancy, we need to make sure that we've got really good calcium, because if you don't have enough calcium, you're not going to be able to develop the bones as you want. So that's very important to think about. So even if you're choosing a plant-based milk, I would urge you to turn over, look at that ingredients label and check the amount of calcium that's in there, and check essentially that it has been fortified and it needs calcium with vitamin D. If your purpose is simply for taste and enjoyment, then you can have any of these milks, but bear in mind that the protein content of any of these milks is actually going to help with satiation. So if you're including it in a smoothie or in porridge or anything else, then it's not going to have that same satiation value, and you may end up hungrier than you would expect. So I would suggest you just think about perhaps fortifying it yourself with a protein powder, or just simply enjoying it as part of a meal that has protein in it as well. So that's one of the other things that you can think about. So that's a very quick roundup of the different types of plant-based milks in comparison to cow's milk. If you're not vegan, then I would certainly consider cow's milk. But the one thing I would say with cow's milk is that's a good one to choose organic. If you're choosing organic cow's milk, then you are going to limit your intake of the antibiotics and the fertilizers that perhaps are in the food and the grain. So you're going to have a much more nutritive milk, and you're also going to limit your exposure to perhaps some of the hormones that the cows will have been exposed to as part of the mass farming. So if you're choosing something like, say, a goat's milk, then a goat's milk doesn't tend to be as farmed as cow's milk. So already you're going to be limiting those factors. So I would suggest you definitely choose organic. There is a cost implication, but it isn't a huge increase in cost. But I would say nutritionally, it's well worth doing. So thinking about your needs, choosing the milk according to your needs. As I say, if it's developmental, then I would certainly stick with cow's milk. But if calories are your focus and you want to reduce your calories, then pretty much any of the milks that I've talked about, as long as they are unsweetened versions and don't have added starches, which act as thickeners to improve the consistency and the texture, then also your calorie intake is going to be reduced by choosing some of those plant-based milks. So I hope you found that useful. I'm going to be dropping in a blog that I'm writing about this into my group, Nutrition the May Way. So as I say, I'd love you to join. We talk all things health, and if there's something that's really niggling you and something you would like to find out a little bit more about, then that is the perfect spot to do it. I'm there. Everybody else in there has experiences and thoughts on some of their choices, and I'm there as well to give my input too. So I'd love you to join. As I say, I'm going to be dropping in a blog about this so that you've got it all in a format that you can just refer to, because sometimes I know it can be confusing. And of course, if you have any questions about any of these milks, then please do either put them in the comments below on this Facebook session. I'd also love you to come into the group and ask me there. If you're enjoying this and you think anybody else that you know may enjoy it, then please do hit the share button on this video, because you can actually share it even for anyone that isn't on Facebook. If you've enjoyed it, then throw over some hearts and thumbs up, and do let me know your queries and questions, and I will take a look at them and I will answer every one of them. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week, same time, when I will be discussing a topic that I pick out from your questions in the group. So again, I'm going to be referring to what you want to know about, and that's what I'm going to be delivering in next week's session. So look out for my next post on that. Thank you again for watching.